What's up, Keller Williams Realty Partners? Just wanted to come to you with a contract to close video. I send a very detailed email to all of my clients, whether they're buying or selling, that has about 90% of the things that will happen during the course of a transaction, both good and bad. I believe in letting them know and setting expectations up front of some of the things that could actually go wrong and some of the things that they are responsible for. This is a collection of what my experience has been over the past 12 years in this business, and over the course of the time I will add and take away from this. But what I'm going to start with is I'm going to assume that we're already under contract, and this first video is from the listing side perspective, and we're going to talk about due diligence. In subsequent videos for the listing side, and I'm going to do a series for the buyers as well, we're going to talk about the inspection, we're going to talk about the buyer's loan, the appraisal, financing contingency, closing, and possession. Okay, but just for this video, we're going to be talking about the due diligence. I'm literally going to read this out loud to you, and I'm going to stop and talk about what has been my experience and some things you need to look out for, and some things, frankly, that the seller needs to know. So again, the due diligence period. By the way, the due diligence period is the period of time where the buyer can walk away from the contract for any reason whatsoever and get their earnest money back. They don't have to provide a reason. All they have to do is provide a notice. So for example, if you have a due diligence of 10 days, that person walks away on day 9.5. There's not a thing in the world the seller can do about it, and the seller needs to know that. Now, there's nothing you can do about it. You want to, from the buyer's perspective, from the seller's perspective, you want that period of time to be as short as possible. You want to make sure there's enough time to get the inspection and all that done, but from the seller's side, you want that to be reasonably short. I'd say 7 days is a good happy medium for both sides. But so again, this is the email I send out to my sellers. The due diligence period for your contract is, and let's just assume that it's 7 days. This is a template. This is a very common time frame. And again, as I mentioned, the buyer has the right to walk away from the contract for any reason during this time period. Unfortunately, sellers do not have the same right. I can't tell you how many sellers, or actually selling agents, think that they have the right to walk away for any reason as well. That is not the case. Unfortunately, sellers do not have the same right. Most buyer terminations are for unresolved repair issues. Now, this is the case. A lot of times they can't come to an agreement on what repairs are to be made. From time to time, a buyer will just walk away. They have life circumstances. Sometimes they just find another house. But most of the time, buyer terminations during this time period are for repair issues they can't resolve. Although it is rare, some buyers continue to shop for a better deal during this time frame, and they terminate. As a listing agent, I've seen this happen multiple times. So and there's really nothing that can be done about it. The seller just needs to be aware. More commonly, buyers use this time to get an inspection and ask for necessary repairs. Sometimes buyers try to take advantage of the situation and renegotiate the price. This is absolutely true. I'd say 2 out of 10 times they'll try to either renegotiate the price or ask for an incredible amount of concessions from the seller because they've kind of got them where they want them while they've got them under contract. Of course, we will cross that bridge when and if we get there. If the buyer asks for repairs, you do not have to do them. So just be aware that any repair the buyer asks for, the seller does not have to do. But many times, buyers will terminate the contract and move on if reasonable repairs are not made. Sometimes a compromise is in order where the seller fixes only a few items on the buyer's repair list. Many times the buyer and seller will agree on an estimated amount of money the repairs will cost and ask for the seller to pay that at closing in the form of seller contributions to closing costs. I can tell you from the buyer side and the seller side, to the extent that you're able, it is always, always, always better to fix things with money if you can. Now, in the Amendment to Address Concerns, which is where all those repair amendments are taken care of and discussed, you don't want to put in lieu of repairs because the lenders don't like that. They'll want to make sure those repairs are done. But again, to the extent that you can, you want to try to fix things with money, to the extent that both sides are willing to do that. because I'm going to tell you from experience, the sellers always want to spend as little amount of money as possible, and the buyers are almost always never happy with that. Okay? The one thing that translates is money. So let's say there was a kitchen cabinet that was messed up, or let's say there was a vent that wasn't run properly, or there were a few rotten deck rails out front. You know, the seller can choose to take care of those things, and if they're going to take care of them with, caution and care, real care, that's fine. But I'm just telling you, oftentimes they'll try to fix that as cheaply as they can. You want to try to work it out with money. And again, what I say at the end here, this is always the easiest way to fix these issues, as long as both parties agree, as long as you're not breaking the law, as long as it isn't something that has to be fixed, for example. Okay? So moving on to the inspection portion. And again, these kind of go together. The inspection, again, we're talking about this from the listing agent's perspective. The inspection will be scheduled soon. Please ensure that all areas of the house are accessible and that all utilities, except for cable and internet, stay on during closing. You need to explain this to your sellers, because sometimes they'll turn maybe they've moved out. Sometimes they'll turn the utilities off. That will enable, or that will keep the buyer from being able to inspect. Also, they want to make sure if the house is occupied or there's still a bunch of stuff in it, you want to make sure that the walls and all the systems can be accessed. Otherwise, the inspector will have to come back out and re-inspect. They're going to certainly charge the buyer for that, and the buyer is going to expect the seller to do that. So you want everything buttoned up and cleaned up and ready to go when they get there. Overfilled rooms, garages, basements should be cleaned out, or at least arranged to the point where the inspector can gain access to all walls and components. All doors to crawl spaces and utility closets and other areas of the house need to be accessible. If there's a million boxes in front of the door that goes into the utility room, that inspector is not going to spend half the day moving that stuff. They're also not going to do any kind of, if the toilet, for example, is turned off, they are not going to touch it for liability reasons. So everything needs to be in that house as if the buyer was going to move in the next day. This will avoid inspection. If you do what I was just mentioning, this will avoid inspection revisits and delays. What they're going to ask, if the inspection gets delayed and it's the seller's fault, they're going to ask to extend due diligence, and you don't want to do that. You want to try to get everything buttoned up and done immediately. Hopefully the buyer's agent will schedule the inspection quickly, so we are not negotiating repairs at 11 p.m. the night due diligence ends. Many buyers will meet the inspector for the last hour of the inspection to discuss their findings. Inspections typically take 2 to 4 hours. If it's a larger house, it may take closer to 4 or 5. My suggestion to all of my sellers is that they vacate the property. They don't want to deal with you. They want the seller to be out. Please be prepared to vacate the home during this time. The inspector will write up a report and give the buyer a copy. The buyers do not have to share the inspection report with you. However, if they do and there are major issues, they must be disclosed on the seller's disclosure to the next buyer should the home go back on the market. So if they find something in the attic that's really, really bad and they disclose that to you, you have to disclose that to the next buyer should that deal fall apart. Okay? So it's always best to try to disclose from the seller's side. It's always best to try to disclose as many things as possible. Many times the inspector will write up every small finding. This is absolutely true, and sometimes this freaks out the buyers, especially if it's first-time home buyers. They are going to write up every small thing they see for good reason. Okay? Sometimes it scares the buyer and causes them to question a very sound home. From time to time, the inspector will write up something that may not be an issue, but suggest further evaluation, again, casting doubts on an item or a system that is fully functional. They'll almost always on the HVAC, for example, the air conditioning, they'll say, the scope of this inspection is limited. We're going to check the differentials to make sure that the air is actually working correctly. And they're almost certainly going to put in there, recommend that you have an HVAC professional come and check it out. Well, sometimes the buyer will see that and they'll be freaked out by it. They'll think, oh my God, there's something wrong with the HVAC when there's actually nothing wrong. So sometimes it scares buyers and causes them to question a very sound home. From time to time, the inspector will write up something that may not be. Oh, sorry, I just read that. Forgive me. On the other hand, sometimes they find issues that need to be addressed. Hopefully, there will be nothing too drastic to make the buyer walk away from the sale. You are under no obligation to fix anything should they ask for repairs. However, refusal to fix some or all items asked for could cause the buyer to terminate the contract. I have seen buyers write up every single thing that was in the inspection and ask for that to be done. And sometimes they don't ask for anything, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. You just got to be prepared. Sometimes some of these buyers are a little nutty. However, refusal to fix some or all items asked for could cause the buyer to terminate the contract. If they do ask for items to be addressed or fixed, and you agree, they have the right to have their inspector go back out for a re-inspection. At the very least, they're going to do a final walkthrough to make sure some of the things are done. If the seller decides to fix these things himself or herself, make sure they are correct. If you're the listing agent, you need to double verify that this stuff has been done before the final walkthrough. Most buyers do not elect to do a re-inspection. Although most buyers just do the overall inspection discussed above, there is no limit to the number of reasonable inspections a buyer can do as long as it doesn't harm your home. It's just a matter of how much time, effort, and money they are willing to put forth. If the home is on septic, for example, it will not be inspected with the initial home inspection, most likely, and the buyer may ask permission to have the septic professionally inspected. Other inspections may include, but aren't limited to, the HVAC. They may have someone come out and put tubes on the HVAC to make sure it's working correctly. They may have a roofer come out and take an extra look at the roof. They may have someone send a sewer scope down into the main sewer line to make sure roots aren't growing through it, and so on. They may have a termite guy come out and give them a free and clear termite letter, or the opposite of that, which means you have termite trouble. They can do radon. They can do any of this. So just keep in mind, make sure your sellers know that they may be doing 2 or 3 inspections, not just the initial inspection. Okay. Again, this will cover about 90% of any problems you'll have during an inspection and due diligence period. Not everything. We can't possibly know everything that's going to happen, but this is most of it. So, and again, that's the due diligence period and the inspection period. And I appreciate y'all watching. Reach out to me if you got any questions.